Hi and welcome to the Gemhogs YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free wire tutorial today, we're going to work on a diamond deco pendant. Now this is made with teeny tiny closed jump rings and quite small faceted beads. In my example, I've got 3mm faceted peridot. We're going to be working with some 2mm ruby. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look at the project, and then we'll make one together. So the Art Deco or Art Deco movement is one that I'm very fond of in terms of shapes and forms, and this is really inspired by the beautiful jewellery that was made at the beginning of the 20th century, as well as design hints within the home and architecture. So I adore working with geometric shapes like this, and what we're going to do today is work with some slightly heavier gauge wire. I have a 12-inch length here of that 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire. That's going to become our main frame. We're also going to be working with some 5mm closed jump rings, and I've got some 2mm tiny faceted rubies. In the example I have on the board today, I've worked with 3mm faceted peridot. Works really well with both the copper tones and the gold tones of those lovely little jump rings. So let's just pop that up in the corner so you can keep seeing that. So 12-inch length, as I say, of 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire. I'm working with raw copper, which is a medium-ish temper. I'm going to start by giving that a lovely warm through, especially through that central half of the wire. And I've added swirls up at the top of my pendant at the neckline section. You can keep it cleaner and tidier than that if you like, but in the very middle of that wire we're going to turn a really sharp bend. So the finer the tip on your pliers, the finer that bend will be, but what we're going to do is to get that much more closed up than we actually need. And then we can bring that back out again. And in that way you get a slightly sharper bend. If you're working with very heavy wire, or if you're working with a really firm wire, you can saw a tiny notch just where you're going to create that bend. But for me, because I'm working with a nice pliable copper, I don't feel that I need to do that. I am just going to add a little bit of strength to that V shape down at the base though. Now, my diamond is longer on the bottom half than it is on the top half. That is by choice. That's just the way I like it to be. You can make that a completely equally sided diamond shape if you like. So what I'm going to do is actually use a ruler for once, and we're going to measure up about 30mm to create that first bend. So I'm going to mark that with holding it by my nail, and then put the pliers into position and then just bend that wire over. I'm not going to sharpen that up until I have the second bend in. So again, I'm just going to hold that in position. Push that down onto the surface of my measuring stick, or my ruler if you prefer, and then I'm going to just pop that plier in position past where my nail sits and draw the wire over. That's probably the last time I'll use the ruler. Once you've got the bends on either side at the same distance from that central V shape down at the bottom, you can take a moment just to refine those angles. And to sharpen them up, I'm just going to take it past the point that I want it to sit at and bring it back again, gripping very firmly just here, although you may find that you need to just give that a straighten when you have finished. If I flip that over, without hitting the camera, I'm going to do the same thing. So bring that past where I want the angle to be and then draw it up again. So if I just open that out, I can play around with that for a few seconds. You could also use the ruler to measure the distance to the top where you'd like that to sit. So again, just straightening that angle as it comes away from the bend, straightening the wire as it comes away from the bend, and then I'm going to decide where I want that neckline section to sit. So you could use your ruler. I'm just going to grip across on one side, push one to an upright, and then the other one across. So just make sure that those two are as similar in distance from the angle change to where you're making the new angle change, and then you know that that is going to look reasonably arrowhead or diamond deco shape. I realise I'm the only person on the planet that calls it deco instead of deco. Can't help it, sorry. So once you've got that angle change in position, in a little while we're going to wrap this sideways wire around the core up at the top here to create a neckline section, and then this piece will become the bail. However, to make our life slightly easier when we do the next stage, I'm just going to very gently open that out, and we're not going to connect them until we've completed the next step of the tutorial. If you struggle to work with that slightly heavier wire, do feel free to use a 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and then just give it a little bit of work hardening to help it keep its shape during the next step. I prefer to use the harder wire, or the slightly thicker wire rather, because it just holds its shape for much longer, and you don't have to go through the process of either hammering it or doing the old om-nom with your flat facing pliers. Let's head back down and add those jump rings in next. For the next stage of today's tutorial, we're going to be working with 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, and I have a 18-inch length of that finer gauge wire. I'm going to begin by wrapping 3 times around the frame, just at the top here. So I'm going to start on the left hand side and move down and around that frame. You could equally start on the right hand side if you're left-handed and that feels better for you. I'm going to put around about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch over the top of that shoulder wire, and then I'm going to employ my pliers to help me get 3 tidy little wraps. You can do that by hand if you prefer, and then tighten those wraps up, but what we're looking for is a really neat and tidy connection. So if they're open wraps like this one, then you can just tighten that up and get them to sit really neatly in position. We're looking for the cut end of the wire as ever to be on the inside of that pendant design. So if I just switch this around ever so slightly so that it sits facing towards my dominant side, we're going to grab on one of those closed jump rings. Now the first time I made this design was around about 2016. I used open jump rings. It still survives, but it would be better to have closed ones because the finer gauge wire won't accidentally escape through that tiny gap. So I'm going to allow that jump ring to sit up against the inside of my pendant design. To begin with, it will be a little bit floppy and floopy. So what I want is for the outside edge of my jump ring, my closed jump ring, to sit against the inside edge of that pendant. I'm going to push the tail of the wire down and all the way through. So what we're looking to do is to have those jump rings sit inside. Now to begin with, that is going to flop around like crazy and really annoy you. So what we're going to do next is to draw that wire around the outside of the pendant design, push the tail down and then pull that through. So we've got a single wrap around just the pendant design. When I let go, that's going to flop. Don't worry about it, just ignore it for the time being. Bring the wire over the top again and grab on one of those little jump rings. Allow it to zip line all the way down. Bring the wire over the top, and again you may need to flip that jump ring over so that the outside edge of that jump ring sits against the inside edge of the pendant design. Push the tail of wire down in the middle, draw the tail all the way through and get that snuggled neatly against the edge of the pendant that sits on the inside of that diamond shape. Now make sure that there's a little bit of tension there. Just grip hold of your jump ring for a moment, pull that wire through, and again we're going to have a naked pass around just the pendant frame, no attachments at this stage. And then we're going to repeat until we've filled all the way around the inside of that pendant design. So I'm going to do a few more of these and I'll meet you just here and we can assess how best to sit that jump ring down at the base. So as I mentioned at the beginning, these things are going to jangle around and look like this is going to be terrible. I promise you we will get there and hopefully you will enjoy the process. So when we get towards the bottom, there's going to become a point where you can no longer fit any more of those lovely jump rings in position. So what I'm going to do is just a couple of lazy strands around the bottom point of this pendant, like so, until I have managed to get to the same point on the other side, coming back up on the right hand side now, with hopefully just a couple of wraps down here. So what I'm going to do is to ensure that the lowest jump ring I could situate, just draw that down ever so slightly, what I'm going to do is to situate that with the wire on the other side as well. So one more little lazy wrap, I think, then that will be symmetrical. Take a closer look, there's 1, 2 lazy wraps, 3, 4. So 2 on either side, get them to sit equal and opposite. Hold that bottom jump ring in position, and then we're going to bring the tail of that wire all the way through on the other side, very carefully controlling that finer gauge wire until you situate that last jump ring at the lowest possible point on the pendant. You will then continue back up the right hand side, so a lazy wrap, and then we're going to add in another one of those little closed jump rings. That one was 2 stuck together, so let's try again. Draw that all the way down, and as I said before, you will need to flip that jump ring over, push the tail down or take it in between that little gap that we left, whichever is easiest for you. Pull that nice and firmly so that you get some tension, and then make sure that it's situated opposite the one on the other side. So I'm going to continue back up on the right hand side of the pendant now, a lazy wrap around just the frame, and then one wrap which has a connection point with one of those lovely closed jump rings. So I'll just do one more, flip that over. Don't worry about all of the jump rings that are jingly jangling and flopping around. Take that wire down the gap, add some tension, and get that jump ring to sit opposite. It's equal on the other side. Don't worry about them moving for now. We just need to make sure that you get tension when you bring that wire back. Lazy wrap around the frame, and then make them sit quite close together, ideally touching, but don't worry if there's a tiny gap, and I'll meet you back up at the top here in a moment. So if you like jewellery with movement, that might be for you, but what I'm going to do now is to show you how to set all of those jump rings so that they sit together and you end up with a little bit more of a solid design. And after that, we'll have the option of adding some gemstones around the outside. I have another 18" of that 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, and I'm just going to start again by adding a little over ½ an inch just over the top of that sideways wire and wrap 3 times. Now I'm doing this over to one side just because it's much easier to see what's happening. Tighten that all up, and then we can scooch that down so that it sits against our first attachment point. So again, make sure that your cut end sits inside the pendant if possible. If not, just make sure it's as smooth as possible. So let's bring that second coil against the first coil, and I'm just going to reorient the piece in my hand to make it as comfortable as possible. So what we're looking to do here is a kind of a lazy spiral up that first half of the first of those jump rings. Naturally enough, the tail end of my wire has caught onto everything. So there we are. So because my finer gauge wire is over the top, I'm just going to allow that to go underneath that first jump ring and back up through the centre of the first jump ring. You can see that wire just coming up and peeking through. So do control your wire at this stage. Make sure you don't get any nasty kinks in there. And we're going to come to a point where the connected piece of long, fine wire is coming over the top towards the inside of the pendant, as far away from the frame as possible. So we're now going to hold both the first and second jump rings together side by side. Don't forget they're connected on the frame of our pendant. And what we're going to do is to bring that tail up now inside the second jump ring. So that's just against my finger, so you might need to just post that up through. Again, making sure that you're controlling that wire, you're not allowing any kinks to occur. And just bring that all the way through. So we're just tying the first and second one together, and we're ending up with that finer wire again coming up at the central point of that jump ring as far away from the frame as possible. So now we're going to draw up that third jump ring into position. So I'm now gripping jump ring number 2 and jump ring number 3. You can help yourself here by making a little U shape, a little needle on the end of your wire, and post that up inside the third jump ring. So pull that all the way through. You might need to use a finger just to guide that very gently so that you don't get any kinks or knots. And we've now tied the second jump ring and the third jump ring together. So you've guessed it, bringing the finer gauge wire away from the jump ring as far from the frame as possible, and then take the tail end of your wire, draw it up inside the next jump ring. So pull that tail all the way along. Again, just control it to make sure that you don't get any nasty kinks, and pull firmly away from the frame. So as you move around areas that are slightly different, so we're moving on the inside of an angle here, it will look slightly different, but as you're moving along straight lines, what will happen? Again, the fine wire is coming over the top of the innermost edge of that number 4 jump ring. So we want to bring that up inside jump ring number 5 now. Bring that tail all the way through. Make sure that that's warm and flexible, and then you've got the next 2 jump rings tied together. As you move around, everything will start to sit just a little bit more firmly. When you get down to the bottom, you'll have to go down from the last but one into that last jump ring, and then back up into the first jump ring on the second side. So I'll meet you back here in a moment. So now everything's starting to kind of come together a little bit more, which is what we're here for. So I've stopped inside the last of those closed jump rings on the right hand side of the pendant, and the wires just come up through from the bottom side. So I'm going to pop that through on the first jump ring on the left hand side where we started, just to bring those 2 pieces together. Now this is one of the reasons I added a spiral on my final piece, was just to hide that extra piece of wire. So you can either just sort of trim that away, or you can add a spiral as I am about to. So we're going to just give that a bit of a squish, make sure that's nice and tidy, and then across the back of the design I'm going to draw that wire back to the right hand side, just up near the neck, which will be in opposition equally to where we started on the left. So I'm just going to wrap 3 times, 1, 2 and 3, and then make sure that we cut the correct wire just inside that pendant. So give that a bit of a trim, and then you can squish that away. So we didn't actually use a huge amount of wire that time. We still have a little bit of excess left to use on the next project. So that's the inside of your diamond deco pendant already done. So what we can do now is choose whether or not we want to add a layer of gemstones during the next step. But right now, I think what I'm going to do is to tie everything together. So what I don't want to do when I draw this tail of wire around, especially if you're using that 1.25 or 16 gauge wire, we don't want it to start pulling over as we bring everything together. So you're going to need to grip across that angle change, and this is on the wire that goes sideways. Push that all the way around whilst you're gripping firmly just here, and that will retain the shape that you've created. You can then just bring that tail over the top. I would probably go for a second wrap. You're going to need to make sure that you hold very firmly so that that wire doesn't get eaten away, and then just squish everything together. So what I'm going to do off screen now is just create a spiral here, create a very, very simple bail up at the top, which is just a wrapped loop with another spiral. You've seen me do this thousands of times now, so I'm not going to bore you with that one. So if you wanted to, you could stop there and your diamond deco pendant would be done, but I'd like to add another layer to this design. So we're going to move on to the last stage of today's tutorial, and I hope that you will enjoy the choice that I have in these beautiful 2mm rubies. So for the last layer on today's diamond deco pendant, what I'm going to do is just gently lift up that lower spiral, and I'm going to prise that open very slightly, so that I've got access to this tiny bit of wire just near to the neck section. And I'm going to use that. If I've run out of space, I could actually just push these little winds of wire down a little bit and add another 3 wraps to that position. But if you run out, you can absolutely 100% just open up one of those spirals to create an anchor point. So again, I'm going to go for 3 wraps just to get a nice secure connection. I might just actually take that all the way around, trim away so that it sits inside the spiral if possible. Let's just get rid of that little scrap. Make sure that that sits down neatly against that wire spiral, and then scooch that all the way back up And then I'm going to leave it open for now because I may wish to finish off in the same place. So if you don't have enough space on the frame of your pendant, you can utilise one of those spirals. But what I am going to do is scooch it all the way over so that it's as close as possible to the connection point I want to start on, which is over on the left hand side of the neck. So to begin with, I'm just going to take that tail down through that mass of wires where we've got all those connection points, and this is again 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, and I have around about a 12 to 18 inch length. So I've got that so that the wire is coming away from the frame. It's underneath, that's absolutely fine. If it comes out on top, also absolutely fine. All we're going to do now is add a halo as an extra layer to this design. So I've got now some 2mm rubies. Again, this is like literally the worst part of any demo for me, is putting the bead on the wire. Allow that to zip line down against the outside of that jewellery frame. So because my finer gauge wire has come from underneath, what I want to do is to support that bead against the outside of the frame and draw the wire over the top of the frame. Find an access point, doesn't really matter where. Pull that all the way through. Now you will want to hold that bead against the frame itself so you can get a tiny bit of tension so that we can create our little halo design. So all I will need to do now is repeat until I have created a halo all the way around the outside of the design. Just pop that down for a second, as I did with this one. So these are 3mm faceted peridots, and these are 2mm faceted rubies. I'll just do one more on the outside here, if you can hold it together whilst I get that drill hole oriented correctly and onto the wire. I don't know how you guys manage to do this, the people that work with seed beads and the such. I know that there's a technique where you can put the bead on the board and pick it up like so. It doesn't work for me. So whatever works for you. So again, I'm going to hold that bead against the outside of that frame, pinch it with my other nail if I need to, find an access point, draw the wire down over the top of the frame because I started with that wire underneath the frame. Make sure your bead is tight against that frame before you make that last pull. Orient the bead as you would like it to sit. Now these can be clustered very tightly against each other like the peridot, or you can have little gaps. It's absolutely up to you. So all I'm going to do is continue all the way around the outside. When I get back, I'm going to hook onto this spiral, wrap 3 times, trim my wire away, and then I'm going to reform that spiral and push it down over that top part of the Deco diamond. So I finished adding that halo of rubies around the outside of our beautiful new Deco inspired pendant. I'll take a photograph of that and leave it on the outro page for you. I do hope that you continue to enjoy content here on the Gemhooks YouTube channel, and I look forward to welcoming you back here again very, very soon. Bye for now.